Now, you are an engineer by trade. So I'm curious, what actually got you into professional sales coaching? Tell us a little bit about this background.
Sure. Yeah. I was running an office, a test systems engineering office, and was customer facing, walked a lot of factories, made proposals, had sales conversations, and thought that I understood sales. One of the guys on the senior leadership team had been following a sales trainer and reading his blog and thought, I think that this guy has got some insurgent ideas, things that could actually help us. And we sat down in the room, and truth be told, before this date, I thought salespeople were manipulative, potentially, if I could use that word. And I was always a little concerned, even around the word sales. Engineers just, or they hear the word sales and we bristle. Gabe, at the end of this training that I'm going to explain here in a minute, that completely changed for me. I've come to believe that sales is an honorable profession. So regardless of the strategies and tactics that we're going to get to on today's call, I would like to submit for the user to consider sales as being a profession of service and honor, and the strategies and tactics just sort of allow us to do that. So, long story short, we ended up contacting that man, and he took us through a 100-week sales coaching experience that just flipped everything upside down about what we thought we knew about human psychology and what it meant to ask questions, the order of those questions, and that sort of thing. And so that led me personally to have this giant interest in sales, pursue sales podcasts, and I ended up leading a sales operations function at that company for 5 years. And so I just have this tremendous fascination now with what it means for two people to connect in a business setting where both people are served by the transaction.
For sure. That's one thing I like to think about with sales. I feel like sales is service. It's all about, I'm trying to help you get that result that you are looking for. I'm
Hmm.
serving you in this way. We don't have to approach it where it's like, ugh, I hate sales. It's sleazy. I don't want to pitch people. I don't want to do this. But when we come with it as an act of service, then it's really, really neat how it kind of comes together. And I know we're going to talk a little bit about that before we dive into what the 100 weeks of sales coaching was about and like some of the tips that you have. I'm curious, did your engineering background shape your approach in selling at all? How did it actually help you when you moved into the sales side of things?
Engineering is a formulaic approach to problem solving at the end of the day. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes, that having an engineering mind, I wouldn't say causes someone to sell better, but definitely differently. And so, in fact, when we were brought through this process, there was a meta aspect to sales coaching. So he did not come in and say, here's the big outline for the next 100 sessions. This is what we're going to cover on what day, and here's the calendar. Part of sales is introducing this idea of pattern interrupts so that we do not sound like everyone else, our competitors, other salespeople, because we're always trying to break this assumption that someone has that we're not here to help. And I say it's meta because he did this in a way that allowed him to surprise us when we got onto these calls. We never knew what we were doing. Are we someone getting in the hot seat today? Is it more of a keynote? Are we learning different questioning strategies? Are we talking about active deals? And so I do think having a formulaic approach on the execution can be helpful or different, but definitely not necessary, because once we're in the room with someone, we really sales is a dance at the end of the day. So it was definitely not formulaic to learn. I do think there are some formulas that we can cover today that can help people with some of their word pictures that they can use as the listener is engaging with potential prospects.
So good. Well, take us through what this 100 weeks of sales coaching looked like. What were some of the things that you learned? I know we're going to talk about some key takeaways in the end of
Mhm.
the episode, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But what were some things you learned, especially in mindset or messaging? Let's just break it down a little bit.
Yeah. So could I start with some definitions,
Yeah,
Gabe,
absolutely.
just so we can get our head around? In my head, there are two sides of sales, and they can be used interchangeably, but in my head, they're not. And so, for the purposes of this discussion, I'd like to separate this idea of prospecting and this idea of sales. And so, specifically, if we could define prospecting as asking for time and sales as exploring fit, then I think that this could be a good frame that we can use for the rest of our conversation. So, I would encourage the listener, if you are interested in doing client work, to call people, to have conversations. Anyone can do that at any time. It is what Brian Tracy calls eating the frog. No one wants to call and interrupt anybody. We're going to get into mindset here in a second that will help with that. That is prospecting. And when Peggy picks up and says, hi, and you say, hi, it's Gabe, Peggy, not sure if we've met, and you're starting to talk, the goal of that call is prospecting. It is to ask for Peggy's time. We're not trying to sell Peggy anything on the head of that call. However, on future calls, or if Peggy is calling us, we are moving into a sales arena. And so the mindset changes. We're going to take somewhat of a defensive posture actually during the sales process, because we don't want to be doing business with people that aren't a fit. And yet when we're asking Peggy for time, we have to take a different position in that conversation. So if we could just define sales as exploring fit and prospecting as requesting time, I feel like that this can unlock the two different parts of sales. It's all going to be inside of a sales coaching program, but those mindsets are completely different. Is that coming through? Have you heard prospecting and sales and other contexts, Gabe? And how do you think about those terms?
Yeah. So I would say sales, I kind of think about in that way. Like my mindset has shifted a lot when it comes to sales. I'm not
Mhm.
scared of them anymore. I might be
Mm.
like, I don't know if I want to be on a call, a little nervous in the beginning and things like that. But I love how you put it. Prospecting is requesting time. So it's all about seeing if they were willing to talk to you, like requesting their time because everyone is busy, right? So like we have to get the yes for the time. But then the sales is exploring the fit. It's not like, I'm going to try so hard to get the sale. I'm going to try and get you into you're a circle. I'm going to get you into the square, like the peg into the square, right? Like that doesn't work, but I'm going to actually gauge the fit. So much easier mindset wise doing that because now you're just having a conversation. And if you see they're a good fit, it's easier to sell them quote
Mm.
unquote on the product or service that you are promoting because they fit. Now, if they're a square and not a circle, right? Then no matter how much you do it, they're not going to fit, and it's going to be not as good of an experience for you or them. And so it's way better to explore that fit. I love that way, the way that you kind of described those, gave those definitions.
Yeah, and to just sort of piggyback off of that, it helps us with our mindset. If we're calling, and I know I'm not trying to sell Peggy anything here, I just want to see if she is available next week. When Peggy picks up, she's going to be in a defensive posture. Who is this? Is it a robocall? That's okay. So my mindset's going to need to be to disarm that and let her know that she has a way out of this conversation, that I'm just trying to see if it would be worthwhile to have another conversation, and that's really the purpose of that call. We're not going to do any selling on that call. Let's Peggy also get used to the fact that this is on her calendar now. She sees it coming. She has some time to think about questions that she may have. And now we can have a productive sales conversation down the road. So, first step is to just divide sales into the initial connection and then the discovery process after that. So, maybe I should move on though to mindset. Could I share just a few helpful things maybe because I want to talk tactics today, gang. I would love it if we could get super practical. And I'd love to hear yours too, Gabe. Your thoughts, your responses. Maybe we could work through a few of these in different ways together. But in my head, like I said, unlocking this idea that we are trying to convince someone is super important early. So I have just a few frameworks that may be helpful around mindset, is as hippy dippy as mindset can sound. I want everyone right now, picture picking up your phone and calling someone you don't know and having a conversation. And all of us should sort of feel that pit. And mindset's going to help us get over that. So, would you be game if I just cover a couple of mindset things with us? Or, Gabe, I'm maybe jumping ahead here. Was there another question that you wanted to start with at this point?
No, let's just flow.
Okay, let's do it. So, the first one is this idea of persuading ideal clients versus manipulating unfit prospects. So when we're going into a call if we feel like we're about to interrupt and we're feeling like we don't want to do that, I'd like to suggest that that's because we're feeling manipulative inside, and that is a false belief. That's not what sales is, and or more likely, we're afraid that Peggy is going to think that we're being manipulative. So I'd like to just submit that there's another word other than convincing or manipulating. This word persuading, and then we want to persuade people that are fits for us. And so we can imagine Peggy is struggling. She needs our help. If we don't call her, she's going to continue to struggle. And it may take some persuasion at some point during the call. But if we do not make that call because we're afraid, then we don't help Peggy. And so at the end of the day, it's what you said, Gabe, sales is helping. So at the same time, if I can introduce a second kind of second frame to sort of piggyback upon that one, Peggy may not be an ideal client. So I heard a sales trainer from Sandler, I think his name was Sean Coyle, talk about this idea of a gumball machine. So when he was a kid, he would put in the nickel and spin the handle and was always looking for a green gumball. In sales, this is our money ball. This is the ideal prospect. Sean's point in that analogy is that not everybody is. In fact, most people aren't. He put in a lot of nickels before he could get to his green gumball. So I refer to unfit prospects as white gumballs. So now picture a gumball machine where 4 out of 5 gumballs are all white. And every now and then we get a green one. So when we're calling Peggy, we have to understand intuitively that Peggy is probably not a fit for us, and that's okay. And that's why we want to get to whether we can add value very quickly and then have the conversation. So before everyone's eyes are glazing over and thinking, well, I don't want to make phone calls. I want to just have my sales page out there and run some Google ads and, and life is swimming along, and I've turned the internet into a money printing machine. And more power to you if you can do that. But at the same time, you'll find that your close rates are way higher if we are willing to have sales conversations with people, or at least make ourselves available to have those conversations. So I'd love to hear from you, Gabe. What do you suppose your proportion is of white to green gumballs in the world? I said 5 to 1. It could be 100 to 1 in the world as you're thinking about people that you help, and you're picturing your own gumball machine. And listener, you can do this also. How many whites to greens are there in Gabe's gumball machine?
That's a good question. I have no idea. I would say there's definitely more no's than yeses because that's just the way it works, right? But yeah, probably I would say 2 or 3 white to wait, no, 2 or 3 green to 5 white. You know what I mean? Like, so definitely not 100%, definitely not 50%, but probably in the 30 to 40%. As you were talking, I was actually thinking of a couple different stories when it comes to like the finding the good fit, the exploring the fit. So
Mm.
one of them is, well, one, I love this. I don't know if you've heard of this book, but it's called Go for No. And it's a really, really short book, but it's really about the whole process that you're not going to get yeses all the time. The goal is you just keep getting the no's to get the yes. And it just like helps break that mindset. But a couple things that I've noticed, like I was a director for a homeschool community, but then I was a support rep for a bunch of homeschool
Mm.
communities way back when, one of my many roles. And when I do info sessions for it, because it was a classical style of learning, it's not going to be everyone's fit. We homeschool because we want to school the way we want. We want to teach in a certain way. So not everyone's going to want to teach the classical model. And it's definitely very rigorous and whatnot, the program that I was using. So when I did info sessions, I actually almost tried to convince them not to say yes, only because then I knew I had the right people who will say yes. I wanted to let them know the goods and the bads, the things that they need to know to make an informed decision and let them make that decision. Right. So that was one of my stories. The other is I remember back, I don't remember why we got rid of a couple cars or something. We needed a new car, and I'm all about big vehicles. Like I'm really little. I'm like 5 foot, maybe 2 on a good day, like
Mm.
a buck, 100 pounds, that kind of a thing. I want a big, massive yellow truck. That's what my goal in life is. But I went to a car dealership and we were like, we want a SUV, da da da. So we told the specs, and guess what he tried to sell me? He tried to sell me a minivan and would not get off the minivan when I told him I don't want a minivan. I hate minivans. I did end up with one for a while, but not there because that's all he was like, look at all the storage and look all the things. And you have 3 kids and they're little and da, da, da. And I was like, you are trying to put my round peg into a square hole. Like, I just can't. I don't want a minivan. So he, kind of like the, trying to be persuasive, trying to do things, but he was doing it in a different way, like not even a sleazy way. He just wasn't
Mm.
listening to me. Right. And I think part of sales is listening. We need to hear what they're saying and what they're not saying and help them guide them in that experience to see like, what is that solution for them? Is it working with us or is it something else? And I think that it would have been a better fit for him to say, you know what, I don't have any SUVs for you that is going to be a good fit. How about you go down the road to this car dealership? I know this my buddy over there has some of these cars, right? Like, it's just one of those things we have to be willing to actually say no to our prospect. Like, no, it's not a good fit. You're better off to work with this person or do this because that's the solution you're looking for, right? So I think about that in terms of serving to sell, right? And so those are a couple of my little stories I have.
I think that that is so appropriate for our conversation because he could have referred you. And had he done that, Gabe, pretty good chance you're going to go tell your friend Peggy, you should check that guy out. There's an honest guy over there. He
Mhm.
knew that he didn't have my yellow truck or my SUV, and he sent me down the road because he knew that his buddy Bobby would have it. And yeah, so if he just imagine if he knew that you were to him that day, and it's not every day, but that day you were a white gumball to him. He didn't have what you needed, and it's okay. That's just not a connection. And like you say, more no's than yeses. I love that you've contextualized that with a very specific time in your because we're talking about green gumballs, but you're saying no, we can be white gumballs, and that's okay. It's okay to not be a fit for someone, and we can offer them and extend to them that same idea. So thank you for sharing that. In fact, this reminds me of the questions that he could have asked. So I actually maybe we could skip ahead.
Hmm?
We don't need to be pedantic here. I've got an outline because, as you know, team, Jason can get a little chatty. We don't need that, right? So to keep me kind of on pace here, but had he asked some questions ahead of time, he could have turned on his ears, listened the way that you were saying, Gabe, and then that could have been a very short visit for you where you walk away feeling better and are now bringing referrals to him, making introductions for him. So maybe it'd be a good time for me to springboard into a couple things that we might say that our ears should hear our mouth say during a sales engagement. Does that sound like a fair place to go next, or did you have something else that you wanted to riff on?
Nope, that sounds great.
Okay. So I'd like to introduce the questions as if there's a buying committee. It's easier if there's one person, but if there are multiple people that a husband wife need to buy in or at a corporate client. So if our audience is filled with coaches and consultants, yes, we can consult with one another, with one person, entrepreneurial, solopreneur businesses, but also there are corporate logos out there that can use our help. And when dealing with a corporate logo, they have a lot that they can invest. And just as a pro tip, you might replace the word cost in your brain, dear listener, with the word investment. In fact, if we hear our mouths say things like you, why, and cost, those are 3 cardinal sins of sales. So I'll give you some words to replace those with in a minute, but we want to be talking about the investment. And so businesses have a lot to invest, but they also have buying committees, and we may not always be working with the decision maker. And yet we don't want to say, Peggy, are you the decision maker? Because we just offended Peggy if she's not, right? So there's an order to these questions that we can ask. And so there are a lot of them. I'd like to give maybe the top 7 or so to just help. And there's a flow to these so that we can do exactly what you said, Gabe, and listen. We can seed the conversation, hear things, and then move our way through the process. So I love that you said, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Maybe we could use our mouth to say some of these questions. All right, here's the first one. So the first goal of any sales engagement, we're going to say something. We're in a meeting now, right? We've done the prospecting. We're in the meeting. We're going to say, okay, so could you tell me a little bit about what's going on with your fill in the blank, whatever the reason is that we're there. Peggy's going to say something to us, and then after that, Imagine what happens when we get asked questions. We say something, but then as we're talking, we realize that's not the main thing. That's just what was top of mind right now. So how do we get to that next level down so we can hear Peggy say more? And before the listener starts to think, well, if I'm asking all these questions, I'm not selling. I'm not introducing my product. I'm not saying things. Peggy is learning nothing. I'm learning everything. And so if I could just invert that momentarily, hold that idea, but also hold the idea that we could potentially be in control when we're asking questions and we're extracting information that we can use later to put together a proposal that's targeted for Peggy in slower time. So the goal here is not to share, it's to learn. And the way that we do that, first question, not a question, it's a statement. Peggy, tell me more. Is that all? Tell me about a time when. These are ways to let Peggy unwind the secondary thought. So, Gabe, have you ever been in a situation where you were talking with someone and you're talking, and as you're doing, you're realizing that's not the answer, but I need to finish this thing. And then what happens if they move on, right? We get stuck. So, how are you feeling about our opening? Of the 7 questions, number 1, tell me more. Obvious, not obvious? What are your thoughts?
Mm. No, I like those a lot. Actually, it kind of reminds me of coaching in a way. Like we're trying to draw out a little bit more about them to learn the specifics. What is their actual challenge that they're
Mm,
having? What have they tried? Well, that might be one of their questions. What have they tried before? The tell me more. I like tell me more because sometimes we just keep it at they're going to start with a surface level answer. And if we
mm.
don't try and bridge the gap by like, oh, tell me a little bit more about that. Like, what was the main challenge of that or whatever it is, we're not going to get to that deeper root in order to be able to know that they're a good fit. But I also like it because it might seem like, oh, well, that's kind of easy. I would know that, whatever. But it's like, no, like the whole point of it is they're going to draw out almost the solution for themselves. Like, oh, yeah, this is what I need to try, or this is, and it makes the sale easier too.
Then when they do say more, we can follow up and do what I like to call either questions with questions or statements with statements. If they make a statement, we make a statement. If they ask a question, we ask a question, or we can ask a question based on their words. So they say more, and then we can say, mind sharing what you mean by, and then fill in the blank with what they said and then go deeper. So this is a loop. We can do tell me mores with questions based on what they just said for as long as we want, and then it's time to move on. So there are actually these questions fall into 3 different categories. The first is pain, second is business case, third is decision making process. So in our brain, we're always going to start with pain. If there's no pain, there's no need for a solution, right? So we have to be able to identify what that is. And then there may be pain, but there may not be a business case, or in a personal finance situation, there may not be the money that the family wants to invest or whatever. And then finally, okay, let's say they have pain, they have a business case. How are they going to make a decision between us and a competitor, maybe? So those would be the 3 steps. So we're in the pain phase. The second part of the pain phase and final part of the pain phase is time. So here's a time question. How long has this been going on? Peggy, thanks so much for sharing more about the issue. Would you mind helping me understand how long has this been going on? Peggy is going to say some things. And then we want to ask another time question. How often is this happening for you? And then most importantly, why now? Especially if Peggy has contacted us and is interested in our services, we want to know why now. This you could have done this a year ago, Peggy, could do this a year from now. Probably talking to me right now for a pretty important reason. Why now, Peggy? And that rounds out pain. So tell me more, and the time questions finishing up with why now.
So good. I like that. Why now? That's powerful because gets them to think like, why? I mean, usually we start solving our problem when it becomes a huge problem. Like I think about the dog on the porch. Have you ever heard this analogy where there's like a nail and the dog's sitting on the nail and he's howling and he just keeps howling, and then once he finally gets up realizes his pain is solved because he's no longer sitting on the nail. So I think our pain has to be bad enough for us to like want to find a solution. So if they're coming to us and they're having the conversation, they probably are ready for a solution.
If I've got a drippy faucet, I'm just I want to fix it, but I don't know that it's the best use of my time. The plumber comes by, maybe we're having a conversation, maybe not. There's water that's leaking all over the floor. The plumber knocks on the door. I'm so glad you were here. Please come in. And they go from, as Dan Kennedy likes to say, from unwanted pest to welcome guest. So that's the end of our pain section. Next up is business case. So we start business case questions with what, and we finish with how much. So what questions, what style questions are, what has the problem caused? And usually we're going to buffer these. So I did skip the buffering section in the beginning. Probably now is the goodest time as any to say we do not want to just be peppering someone like they're filling out a questionnaire, right? But this is not the way people interact. I'm trying to arm you guys with some bullets here, but buffering is very important. And buffering is this idea of not jumping right into an answer and putting some space between a stimulus and a response in some cases. So some buffering statements might be happy to. So Jason, would you mind building a rocket ship and sending it to the moon as part of the package? Happy to do that, Bob. Right? We don't want to say, no way. What are you talking about? I don't make rocket ships. Now we're gonna have some follow-on phrases that that'll cover at the end after a happy to specifically. But that's an example. Or would you be open to me asking a follow-on question? Oh, you may be saying that for an important reason. These are statements that we want to salt in to help our sales conversation advance in a way that we don't feel like a porcupine to somebody, or they're just a number and we're just checking the boxes. This is a guided process, like I said, that can be used to persuade or it can be used to manipulate. I'm just saying that if we're trying to help, we are going to want to know what that problem, what the issues are causing, what the emotional effects of those issues are, so that we can design a solution that is addressing the problem. So once again, what questions? Mind if I ask you, Peggy, what has the problem caused for you? Mind if I ask, would you be open to me asking what you've tried to resolve it? And then finally, what happens if things don't change? So this ties back to the why now. Like, well, what if we just continue and we just don't touch it? So those are the what questions, Gabe. Is this coming through? Does this seem logical to your mind? I love that you're coming from outside of this sales coaching world, and I'm just sharing it with you cold, right? We didn't talk before this. So how are these ideas sitting with you? Too much to try to remember? Something we should write down on a note card? Interesting, but maybe not applicable. Where are you at this point? We're about halfway through our questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's all relevant, and I think it's great to if everyone has a notebook and pen and are writing these questions down. Something I think about, I like to have some questions just kind of prepped for my calls, so I can just not be, when you're a little nervous, and you're like, oh, what should I say next? Well, if you have a list of questions next to you, you can just pick and choose some of them. And so, kind of going through that framework of the different questions that you've shared, one of my favorites, which you just touched on, is actually, so what would change in your life if blank? But then the opposite, what wouldn't change?
Wouldn't change.
Where would your life be if it doesn't change, right? So like that's really important because it really helps them to see what does the future look like if I don't solve this problem. So I really like those.
That's maybe a difference and probably could be used on a marketing site also. But in marketing, it's one to many. We don't get to actually have the conversation, hear the response, prepare the next question. So I do think if nothing changes, this is sort of points towards tonality, speed and tonality. We're going to start peppy, interested, energetic at the beginning of a call. But we're getting down to the issues and what they're causing in someone's life. It's not exactly loving our neighbor as ourselves, but we say, so Peggy, what happens if things don't change? I mean, Peggy's going to be sort of taken back by that. As the questions go on, our voice should get slower and our tonality should get lower because we're asking sensitive questions. And it's okay to ask Peggy, mind if I ask you a sensitive question? And to ask it like that. Now, mind if I ask you a sensitive question, Peggy? I mean, we should do this naturally. I just want to throw out that the questions are organized such that we do start more energetic and then we become slower and lower with our tonality. For example, how much do you feel like the issues are costing you? So again, this would be for a corporate client where we want to do some coaching of their team, maybe, or maybe we're consulting around their business processes, something like that. Eventually, this person is going to have to take a business case to somebody, whether it's a spouse or a manager or whomever. And we want to get our eyes on how much the thing is costing. So that brings us through pain and business case style questions when we're executing our sales discovery questions. Should I move on to decision making process, or did you have a follow up? Okay,
No, let's move on. I love it.
cool. All right. Next up. So, lastly, finally, we want to understand once we've talked about the pain, we've identified the issues, we know why now, we know what the problem has caused, what they have tried to resolve it, what happens if things don't change, how much are these things costing. We need to understand two main things. Number one is whether there are competitors involved. That's going to help inform how much time we want to spend on our proposal. If we're one of 10 options for them, this isn't so good. We're at two options. That's more solid footing. So how do we talk about competitors? Well, it's always a little dicey. So I'd like to suggest that instead of using the word competitor, we replace that with external help. So Peggy, mind sharing whether you are seeking other professional help? Are you seeking professional assistance? And Peggy can answer something like that rather than, so are there competitors? Is this a competitive deal, Peggy? I mean, this is what I'm talking about with the tonality of sales. So important to have that right. I'm going to just believe that the team doesn't need me to say that, but having the words to say sets up the tonality. And so, like I said, mind sharing. Are you seeking other professional help? At rewritemysite.com/Gabe, I'm going to put all of these questions, and maybe some more that I'll just throw in that we're not going to have time to cover today, so that, or throw it in the show notes if you have time, Gabe. That's fine, but I want to task you with that. That way, people can get this information. So I'll try to put together some notes, basically some sales notes. So if you're listening to the call and you want to put your pencil down, go for it. I will do this for you. This just dawned on me. This is a lot of information. If someone were going on a run or in the car, there's no way to record this info. So I want you to have it. Then you can build your own little cheat sheet and just have these as an iPhone note down the road. So, all right, maybe I could share the last question and then get your feedback.
Yeah.
So cool. So last question on the decision-making process. Remember, pain, business case decision-making process. Last question is who? So Peggy, you open to sharing who else besides yourself is going to be involved. We don't want to say, like I said, hey, Peggy, you the decision maker. Or teased that earlier. We want to say, mind sharing who else other than yourself will be involved in the decision, in the process, something like that. And now we are acknowledging that Peggy is part of, maybe even the advocate of the problem. In fact, we call this in sales sometimes the CEO of the problem. In other words, there's another decision maker, a buying economic buyer, but that person's not making the decision. That person may be Peggy's manager, but that person is trusting Peggy. So if we're talking with the CEO of the problem, great, but there may be a different CEO of the problem. Last two questions in the who category here are, do you feel like I understand the issues? And if Peggy says no, could you help me understand what I'm not following here? Right? But if she says, yes, I do, I think you understand everything, Gabe, then the final question is, would you like my help? And if Peggy says yes, then we are green lighted to put together a proposal that is very specific around the things that we learned during discovery. So I am so glad that we got to skip ahead here, Gabe, whenever you said, I feel like sales is listening. And I'm thinking, exactly. So how do we execute a sales plan of attack so that it sets us up to get our pencil out and we just do a lot of listening and we let Peggy talk? All right, there's an operational framework for the questions, Gabe. I will get those written down for you. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I like it. Well, and I want to talk about a little bit about the close as we close, because I love those questions, especially how you worded the who else is involved, essentially, like who is the other. You didn't say decision makers, but I think that's important because, especially, let's say they're I'm thinking about a product like a marriage product or something like that, like, or maybe it's a business product, but you have a spouse and the spouse is going to have to say yes to you purchasing or investing in this product, right? So it's like knowing who that is and knowing like how many people need to be involved in this decision is really, really helpful. I'm curious because then I love the question of I think I can help, or would you like me to help you? Or even just the question of like, I really feel like we could be a good fit and I could help you out. Would you like to learn more about how I could help? But then how, and you're going to write up the proposal. How do you actually close the sale itself on the call? What does that look like?
Okay, I love the question because what I'm suggesting with these specific tactics is that we are now going to take our pen and go take some time with Peggy's problems
Mhm.
that we illustrated and try to come up with a custom plan. There are one call close arrangements, and and we're really getting into a distinction between the kind of service provider we're talking about. So I'll answer the question, but first, could we just acknowledge there are two kinds of services? One is totally custom. We have no idea what it's going to cost. We need to go back, sit down, put together a custom proposal. And the other is a productized service, where in our head we already know there are three levels of effort here, and we know the prices for those things. So if Peggy says, "Would you like my help?" and we're selling on that productized services side of the house, I think it's okay to say, "Mind if she says, yes, I will like your help." I say, "Mind if I put in front of you a couple of suggestions?" And this in sales is called a Chinese menu. So, a Chinese menu tactic in sales is where we give Peggy options. Now, this can be if she is asking us, how much is it going to cost? And we're on that custom side, we can also use a Chinese menu because we can say, you know what, I would love to know from you, Peggy, if you wouldn't mind sharing how much you're looking to invest. For example, we've had solutions that are in that $10,000 to $25,000 range. And then we've got this other set of solutions that are really in the $75,000 to $250,000 range. So would you mind sharing with me which of those categories you feel like you're in? And then that way Peggy isn't feeling pressure to divulge her budget, right? So that's a Chinese menu on the custom side. The Chinese menu on the productized services side is we have three levels of support. And usually that third level is price anchoring for one of the lower levels, is the reason why SaaS products are always putting enterprise pricing, call for help. We know it's expensive and it may be a great investment for us. So I think it's okay to go ahead and share the three levels, price anchor high on that high level, and say, but honestly, where you are, Peggy, I would suggest, and then by listening to her, if we got a productized service, probably have a good idea whether it's A or B, probably not C. And say, I'm going to suggest that you start with A. We can always upgrade to B later. I don't think that you're there now. I think we can solve all these products in this first level. Or, you know what, there's a lot going on. We could start with A and crawl, walk, run here, but I really think you'd be happier with B. We could get it done faster if you started at level B. How is that sitting with you, Peggy? And hopefully we're on a video call and we can read Peggy's body language as we're saying the amounts at the end. And now it's a conversation around closing. So curious how you would have answered your own question though, Gabe. How have you heard people close effectively, or do you have your own thoughts?
My biggest thought is having the ask, because a lot of times people get on not coaching calls, sales calls or
Mhm,
discovery calls or whatever you want to call them,
mhm,
sometimes strategy calls, and they don't make an ask at the end. There's no
mhm,
like next step. So there needs to be either a meeting booked from a meeting or something, a way to have a call to action, have an ask, right? Because otherwise we're doing ourselves a disservice too. And that is if it's a good fit, right? I like the
mhm,
idea of having the different options, essentially knowing I know what I offer. So if I was listening well, I'll know what one or two things to offer that potential client to kind of fit into what they've told me already. Now, I am curious though, because I wasn't even thinking about the fact that sometimes we might have to have a proposal, because I'm more like I have coaching clients, I have programs. I already know
mhm,
kind of what they cost, what my ranges are, what my packages are. But for
mhm.
someone who's very service based, who might be taking on a larger project for that person, have to customize it, they may not be able to make that ask actually on the call. So, what does that follow up look like?
I love this question because most of the whales that a coach or consultant are going to land are in that logo corporate space. And almost always, those are going to be custom proposals. And almost always, we want to have an idea of what they're looking to invest before we go into that scenario. So, in my head, we would want to ask permission always. And I guess this is the takeaway. If there's no other takeaway other than my biggest takeaways that we're about to share right now, it would be ask permission. This if sales is permission based, you can ask anything because all you're going to say is, "Mind if I ask you?"
Mhm.
Fill in the blank, and then they're going to say, "I'm offended that you would even say something." Then no worries, let's save that one for later. But no one says that, Gabe. They say, "Of course, yeah." What or mind if I ask you a sensitive question? We don't even have to say what the question is. Just mind if I ask you a sort of important question? And then they can agree, and now we're getting them moving forward with their response. Because again, we're not trying to necessarily close on these larger deals. If it's productized services, close it. Absolutely. That's not a question. I think you can give them a Chinese menu and close that. I do like the idea even then of saying, could we talk about next steps with you, Peggy? Would you be open to having that conversation? Absolutely, Gabe. Let's have that conversation. Cool. Now we're introducing the Chinese menu the way that we talked earlier. So this is permission based. But over on the services side, yes, we want to say, mind sharing what you're looking to invest. Well, we really can't share that with you. Like I said, there are other vendors that we're looking for here, Gabe. So it can't I just not comfortable, not able, have a policy, whatever. And the way to overcome that is no worries, totally understand that. How about a range? Some of my clients find themselves in range A or range B. Where would you put your company? And now we do the follow up. And usually, when there's an objection, the person doesn't have a second objection behind it. Again, the goal is to help, to not be manipulative. I'm not trying to create sales assassins, but we can accomplish a lot of what we want as long as we ask for their permission first. And then we're just ready for the objection. And then we can come in behind it with that Chinese menu in this case, since we're talking about closing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so follow up to that question, and then I want to hear your biggest takeaways. But
Mhm.
let's say we finish the call, we don't make the sale on the call. We're going to need to. Well, there's still somewhat of a yes. They're not saying they haven't said no yet. What is the next step to following up with them in that way? How do you make the ask after the call if it didn't happen on the call?
So we always want to have the next. I love this too because this is what can happen. Great meeting, Gabe. So glad that you spent time with us. Give us some time to think about it. Oh, so it sounds like you're interested. Oh, yeah, we're really interested. Cool. And then we hang up. And now what? And you're asking, how do we wake that conversation back up after the call? Is that the question?
Exactly.
Okay, so this is one of the biggest takeaways that I did not list here from sales, but when we mess up, because we're trying not to mess up, right? This call is about priming the pump so we don't do that. But there are times when we get ghosted, when a prospect will sift us during discovery for information and then just get cold feet and then not want to talk again. Totally understandable. That's going to happen. But because we know that's going to happen, we can prevent it. So well, it looks like we're running low on time. In fact, in the beginning of the meeting, we didn't talk about setting up meetings and the four things that we do and that sort of stuff. But one of those things that we do at the beginning of the meeting is saying, Peggy, we had set aside 45 minutes for this conversation, should only take 30. But if it goes the full 45, are you going to turn into a pumpkin in 45 minutes? Or should we put something else on the calendar? So we know in the very beginning what's going to happen at the end of 45 minutes. And if she says, yeah, I've got a tight one, it's going to have to quit at 45. I said, okay, cool. So how about then we start looking at your calendar now? Let's take the time now and slower time. You tell us when you think another day would work for you in case we want to continue. Now we don't have to. At the end, at any point, either of us can walk away. That's equal business stature. We don't want to just put all cards in the hands of the prospect. But at the same time, we're going to get something on the calendar for another time. So hopefully we've already got that locked in. But if we don't, we get to the 30-minute mark. I said it would take around 30 minutes. We got about 15 minutes left. We're running on fumes here. I think it would make sense for us to continue the conversation. How are you feeling, Peggy? And by then, hopefully, we've not divulged pricing because once we give pricing, that's when they want to pull back and go look at competitors. We all do this. It's just the way that I'm teaching a sales process. They have a buying process, and the sales process and the buying process are at odds. So because we know that, we can try to preempt some of this stuff. So a long way to say, let's not get to the 45-minute mark and be hanging up with Peggy and not have this on the calendar. At 30 minutes, team, let's go ahead and ask, you know what? I think that we've got more to talk about. I don't feel like I have enough information to even put together something yet. Mind if we continue the conversation later? If we get to the end and we've covered everything, okay, can we talk about next steps? I'm going to put together a proposal for you, Peggy. Mind if we put something on the calendar so I can present what I have for you? So we want to get something on the calendar before we hang up with Peggy. It's more important to do that which is why we introduced time early, because great, we had a great discovery call. Peggy learned a lot. Peggy could want to work with us, but Peggy just gets distracted. And now what? So that was a non-answer, wasn't it, Gabe? The answer is please, team, do not get in the situation where we are at the end of the call and we don't have the next meeting set up. So, because there is nothing that you can do after that. You can email, you can say, hey, I've got the proposal ready. Do you want to get on the phone? But it feels weak at that point. So, okay, I'm gonna take my sales trainer hat off and let you re-ask your question if you want to, Gabe. Did that cover it? Because it was a bit of a non-answer.
No, I like that. It's essentially like booking a meeting from a meeting. So always having a continued conversation until they say no. So I really like the idea of that because then you don't have this pressure getting off the phone or whatever sales call and being like, I don't have a sale and I don't have anything booked. So now I have to hope they don't ghost me an email or, those
Mhm.
kinds of things. So I really, really like that approach. So yeah, I think it answered my question. So I love this conversation that we've had. I feel like it really comes down to listening, really understanding who the person is, taking that time to really dive deep into them. I say if they're doing most of the talking, it's okay because
Yes.
it's really good because you're getting to hear and
Hmm.
understand what their needs are. Now, I am curious as we kind of are wrapping up our time together. What surprised you most in those 100 weeks of sales coaching? What were your biggest takeaways from that?
All right. So I only had two that in my head in our last podcast episode, and I'll give those two. So I'd like to give two runners up first because two more dawned on me as I was prepping today. So there are two phrases that I think are super powerful in a sales arrangement. In fact, one of them is a phrase that I call myself a failure if I don't say these two words. And those words are sounds like. So when someone says something to me in a sales engagement, what I want to say back to them is sounds like, and then repeat back to them what they've said. Now, this is widely known and done. I don't think this is groundbreaking information. However, those words sounds like will trigger the rest of the response. So we want to be saying sounds like a lot during the call. And then that way, Peggy can say, yes, that is true. Sounds like dot, dot, dot. Yes, Gabe, I'm understood. You've understood me well. And now Peggy is answering her question. Gabe understands me. Gabe understands me. Gabe understands me. So tip one, use the word sounds like. If you don't know, I don't know what question to ask, say sounds like. This is going to get you out of everything else that you might get into in most sales arrangements. All right. Secondly, you asked about the close. This is a good closing transitional phrase. Peggy, if you came to believe that all of these problems could be washed away and we could do it in 3 weeks, and that 1 month from now, your life looks like dot, 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 would you be interested in me putting together a proposal for you? Would you be interested in hearing my three pricing levels to do that? So that's the if you came to believe. So this is a way that we can introduce the close at the end of the day. All right, so those are runners up. One's in the beginning, early and often sounds like the others at the end, if you came to believe. Here are my biggest takeaways after 100 weeks of sales training. And no, it's not a mindset thing, although, like I said, I think that's really important. This is super tactical. When we are in these sales arrangements, they are going to, and this is one of the hardest objections to handle. So they're going to say things like, well, Gabe, does your program include dot, dot, dot? And maybe you say, you know what, it doesn't. And you're like, well, cool. Could you just add that? Could you just include that, Gabe? And now we don't want to say no to this because they're interested in doing business with us, right? So they're asking the very questions we want them to ask, which is, will you do stuff for me? And we're thinking, is this for pay or is this for free? Am I throwing this in? What are we doing? How do we get out of this? How do we disentangle ourselves from this very pivotal, important moment in a sales call where they're finally interested and we want to talk about the solution, but we don't want to feel greedy? How do we do it? The words, I teased it earlier, the words happy to. So we're gonna say, and this was tough because Jason, will you build the rocket to the moon? Happy to, right? My brain knows that this is probably not possible, and yet I've got to say happy to. But it's okay because two phrases are going to come later. All right, team, here they are. Happy to. Let's say I do. What then? And if the answer is if you build that rocket to the moon, then we are in. I don't care what the price is. Okay, then I'm happy to build the rocket to the moon, right? We can do that. Or so that's playing it forward. So we're either going to tap the brakes or we're going to play it forward. So we play it forward by saying happy to. Let's say I do, what then? Here's the tap the brakes. Happy to. Before I do, mind if I ask you a few questions? So we don't want to say, no, I'm sorry. That's one of those words we want to avoid. We want to avoid no, you, why. Those are finger pointing kinds of words. We want to keep the conversation moving forward. We also don't want to be unethical. We're actually not happy to necessarily send the rocket to the moon. So make the assumption in your mind that allows you to say happy to. Just assume the best. Say happy to. Before I do, mind if I ask you a few questions? Were you planning on paying for the rocket to the moon, or did you want me to throw that in? Right? Or happy to. Let's say I do. What then? Are you coming? Are we going to ink the deal here? So I know 100 weeks of sales training, all those hours in the seat and whatnot. Those two phrases have gotten me out of a lot of trouble, and I hope they do for you guys as well.
That's so good. I love that. Sounds like, happy to, all the things. Like those are really, really good. To really, and I also loved, what was it like you were talking about? Oh, sounds like, I love that because it's like it really builds that trust because you're actually telling them what they said, but it
Mhm.
helps them to be like, she really listened and knows what I'm talking about. Like she has clarity on where I'm at. It really builds that trust. So I really like that. It's kind of like you were talking about in the beginning, mirroring them in a way, right? And so I think we mirror when we're together, we mirror body language, right? Like it says something, somebody's leaning in, you're probably leaning in too, but it's kind of the same way in what they're saying, like mirror that. Very cool.
Great way to close it out, Gabe. Yes, mirror and matching. If are we dealing with a high D on the disc, or we're dealing with someone who's more reserved, we're going to kind of mirror and match their body language. And then sounds like also gives them the out. They get to say, "Well, no, that's not exactly what I meant." And then we
Yes.
can have, "Oh, okay, well, then what did you mean?" And now they're talking and we're listening again. So I think we
Yep.
can summarize by saying sales is listening. I'm going to quote Gabe for that, and appreciate uh, spending some time here talking about sales with you, Gabe. And
Yeah. It's been great.